Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So Amy's not here to lead, so I'm kind of disappointed. So I guess I'll go ahead and get started with the agenda. I wanted to showcase, let me back up before I start showcasing anything. Kubernetes in a recent version decided to get rid of the Docker runtime. They recently switched to running containerd. Containerd is a branch off of Docker in some way, shape, or form that enables us to interface without the Docker engine. In this case, containerd will use runc, which was also created by the Docker team to run containers. So Kubernetes uses containerd as the API. Containerd goes down to runc, which actually executes the containers that end up running on our nodes. With this, we have a new method of being able to hop into containers to perform some troubleshooting actions. Previously, Docker provided all the necessary stuff. You could do a Docker exec, and then you'd have, a shell of some kind. If that shell was not enough, such as the requirement to install a tool that required root access to certain portions, there's another method using Docker where you could exec into a new container, attach it to the namespace and the network space and such to the container that you want to interrogate, and you'd have all the necessary access available to you. Containerd does not have this same capability, but runc does. You just have to know how to leverage it. So I thought I would take our demo and show us how we would do that. I've got an open merge request that covers how to accomplish this task. So I'm kind of going to roll through what I've learned, because this is slightly different than the easy method that we're used to. But let's say, for example, we'll want to troubleshoot a container. So the easiest method for me, I'm going to leverage our canary stage in production, because not all node pools are running containerd versus the Docker runtime. And this is just due to the upgrade progression and things happening through incidents and mitigations that we've done over the course of time. Production has suffered more incidents, therefore production has more containerd running node pools. So it's easier for us to use canary as a test bed. So let's pick a pod on Canary, and then we can validate that it is running the containerd runtime. Listen, sir, don't tell me this information. You're connected, so what are you complaining about? It's my contact sec. It is. Okay, do I have to resort to staging? Listen, I had a demo ready for you all. I was like, yeah, I'm going to sit here and show this and this and this.
Can you show us how to debug this?
This is probably my computer not behaving properly, so no. Oh, look, it failed to establish a connection. I'll use staging because I'm seeing I need to connect to a specific cluster. I see that we do have some containerd node pools running in staging. Okay, so let's pick a pod. This is staging, so like I'm not worried about breaking things. I should have started with this anyways instead of production, but so be it. So I'm just going to pick a WebSockets pod just because. So k8s pods and GitLab. What we want out of this is where it's running. So we could get that information by just passing in the wide flag, which gives us which node the container is running on. So I know that we are now running on this node here. So I'm going to spin up a new shell, and I'm going to go ahead, GCA staging, gcloud compute, SSH into that guy. And then the other piece of information that I need to know, because this is container D, it's a little more complicated because like normally what you would do is just do a Docker PS and then poof, you have all your information. But because Docker is not the runtime, you don't have that information. Cry control is the container D equivalent to providing us this information. And if I remember correctly, the command is not PS. List containers, so it is PS. So if I do a PS, you have all of your available items that are running. In this case, you see that there's a GitLab work course that's running. There should be a web service. I only see one of those, so I picked a poor example where this particular node is only running one pod of something. If I were to pick a node, say in production, where there's 4 pods running on it, you're going to see 4 GitLab workhorses, but you don't know which pod or container that resolves to. So I can't tell you from via the cry control command that this pod that I want to interrogate is this container that is running here. That's kind of the downside. So in order to get that information, what you would do, let's see, JQ status container status stati. Fine. Oh, why didn't anyone tell me I did that wrong? Fine. What do you want? This is turning out to be the worst demo ever. My apologies. It is status, isn't it? Status. Container oh, it's plural. So here's the fun part. You know, we have 2 containers participating in this pod. We got the web service container, we got the workhorse container. So let's just target a web service container because it's at the bottom. I'll have to scroll up. The container ID is the important context here. So we can see that the container is 9AAF. And if we go down here, we should see 9AAF. Sure enough, the web service corresponds with 9AAF. So now that we have all that necessary information, we now have the ability to do fun things. Well, firstly, I guess I should go back a little bit. Like, so previously we would do like a Docker exec and we just pipe in the container ID. Cry control does allow us to do that. So if I do an exec, I think I still need the TTY, and let's see if this works. Bin bash. Failed to find container, so let's use the actual ID. I'm still learning certain things, so that's why I'm not fully fleshed out. Must be specified with interactive true. So I guess you still want the I flag. Yeah, so you get to a show, you get the ID, you're the Git user, but you're still limited. Like you can't switch to root because it requires authentication, which we don't have. So your tooling capabilities are still limited. You could still do a curl on localhost and do fun things if I'm assuming, you know, curl is available. So stuff like that is available to you. But what if you want to do something more invasive, like run a ptrace or an strace, or you want to do a TCP capture, stuff like that? You cannot do that inside of the container as is. You have to become root in some way, shape, or form. You have to do other things in order to install your tooling that you may require. So having this really lengthy container ID is very important because we need to interface with runc, and cry control doesn't provide us the native capabilities. If I do a exec and help, you'll notice I can't specify the user and I can't specify various kernel capabilities that I want to be able to execute. Previously, we would just do a Docker exec with the user flag And there's also the cap add flag. So we could specify the user and which capabilities out of the kernel that we need to operate on. However, run C does provide us this information. We could add kernel capabilities. We could specify the user that we want to log into, etc. So that's what we need, but there's a catch with this. If I do run C, and I forget the exact commands because they're all slightly different. PS inside of run C gives you the list of processes running inside a container. So it's more like the process list command. List is the listing of the containers that's running by the run C container runtime. So if I do a list, you don't get any information, which is highly unfortunate. This is because run C chooses to store its data inside of run C, which is not how container D stores its state. I cheated because I did some investigation in this. And if I do run container D, run C, k8s, and then I do a list, we get all of our listing pods. And if I shrink this down very tiny, we see that there's a lot of information on the screen that you probably can't see because I'm sharing a pretty large monitor. But the important part we need is this lengthy ID up here. So if I copy that into my buffer, and if I do a exec, give me a terminal on that, give me the shell, I now have basically run a Docker exec into the container or a cry control exec into the container. So if I want to do something more fun, I could specify the user. I'm not going to sit here and specify kernel capabilities because I can't remember. But now I've got root access into this container. So now I could sit here and I could run TCP dump. I could install ptrace and run a process trace and do really fun things on a container in which on Docker was easy. On container D, it just changes how we get to the same capabilities. So that's what I wanted to showcase. I do think this is cool. I'm still running up some documentation so that we could document this in the future. The one thing I want to explore next with this in general is what to do in cases where we have identified a pod that's misbehaving. We don't want it to be removed from the cluster, but we want to separate it out so we can continue interrogating it. That way we're not blocking auto deploys, but we could still interrogate this container, or we could segregate this container so it's no longer receiving customer traffic, but we could still look at it in some way, shape, or form. I want to figure that out next, if that's possible. And Alessio, I don't know how it's actually appropriately pronounced. I say cry control because it's CRI and it's CTL. So, some people say cube cuddle. I guess I could say cry cuddle. All that sounds goofy. So that's what I wanted to demo. Does anyone have any questions? I see no questions.
That's
so let's
fantastic. I just need to learn all this stuff again. I mean, why do they need to change everything all the time, right? Why can't we have something which is just staying the same and works everywhere?
I would hedge a bet that something has to do with Docker and its business model, but I'm not going to go into those details.
Yeah.
By the way, Docker, I think they're going to make it paid from the start of next year.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Yep, I saw that.
Okay, then it's becoming irrelevant. Nice.
It's still free for personal use, but...
Yeah, but GitLab's a large organization. I imagine we have more than 250 engineers, and I imagine all of us have Docker installed. So technically, we should be getting licenses. Any case.
Yeah, it's...
Discussion items. I wanted to talk about the two ongoing migrations that we are accomplishing. So we all know that the web migration is now completed. At this point, what's left is cleanup and documentation updates. Graham did get started on this. We removed the virtual machines in our pre and staging environments, and we removed the deployer mechanisms and patcher mechanisms. So we're no longer deploying to the nodes that still exist in production. I just recently created a merge request to remove the virtual machines in our production, both main and canary stages. That merge request is now out for review. I merged a chef change that removes some of the roles necessary for staging and pre, but I need to create the merge request for production. And then after that, it's just, I think it's, we still have tuning left to accomplish. Cluster B is still in our testing phase. So it's slightly different than the other two clusters. Graham is currently managing that, and I haven't looked into the state of that issue yet. So I think what's left is to either push that change out to the rest of our clusters or continue tuning. So I need to follow up on that one. And Henry, regarding your question about apdex drops during deployments, I need to create an issue for this because I have failed to do so.
We looked into this all the time also since we moved API because we see the same thing there, right? But somehow we never really came to a good conclusion. Like we couldn't really prove that it's related to pods being slow when they are new or on new nodes, right? We couldn't really prove that. And you had the suspicion that maybe it's just being the readiness checks,
the
health probes being accounted wrongly to the apdex when we terminate pods. So it's really strange because I'm not sure if we really have an issue because error rate is not going up, just the apdex dropping down.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if we really have an issue there or not. The thing is just every time we deploy and we see the apdex drops, I think, oh, something's going wrong.
Yep.
Okay, but I also have no good idea of what it could be. It's just very bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll create an issue because I know one does not exist. If it does, I have obviously forgotten about it. I'll link it to this epic and let's make sure we kind of prioritize that.
Yeah, I think you had this very long issue looking into pod scaling and performance issues there, right? I'm not sure if this is maybe
for the API. I think that was more tuning though, instead of trying to figure out what was going on with the apdex drops. So separate context that we need to address.
Yeah, right.
Any more questions about the web migration? Okay, so pages migration. This is something that just recently got kicked off. I'll share my screen really quickly because I do have some things I could at least showcase a little bit. I've pre-populated our epic with a variety of issues. I'm currently working on trying to get pages working on Kubernetes. I did notice that there's a lot of missing stuff in our Helm chart preventing me from getting that started. So I expressed this in my last demo meeting, but just to reiterate this, my goal is to start with pre-prod as a method of learning how pages needs to operate inside of Kubernetes. It's a new service to me entirely, so I need to learn about it in the first place and then get it working in pre-prod and then leverage staging as a way to test how we're going to perform the migration. Because I know we're going to have to make some fun changes to our HA proxy cookbook in order to enable a smooth migration to avoid downtime and such. So staging, its primary focus is just going to be, let's figure out how we do this in a non-outage driven methodology. At some point, we need to sit here and this issue right here is to determine how the configuration needs to look like for resources as well as tuning it so that it runs well and our HPA responds accordingly, because we do have the occasional customer will perform a release and then pages suffers because everyone clicks on their blog post linking, ends up landing on pages and kind of drives us up the wall.
I have a question. Can I ask Skarbek?
Yeah.
Why do we have HA proxy in front of pages, which is doing SSL termination by itself?
To load balance the load across all of the servers. It's just a
TCP level.
Yep.
Is it this? Okay, so do we still need it in a Kubernetes environment? The ingress should do this by himself. No, not even ingress, exposing the service.
You have a good point.
Okay.
You have a very good point, Alessio. I like that idea. Tell you what, you have such a good idea.
Maybe we need it in the beginning if we're going to do mixed deployment with VMs.
Yeah, maybe to start, we'll definitely want to keep HA proxy in place, obviously, but I'm
thinking it can be just one entry for the Kubernetes cluster and then let Kubernetes deal with load. I mean, then you have false load balancing there, because then from HA proxy perspective, you have just one endpoint. No, what is the name in the backend? One backend in HA proxy,
Backend.
and then actually there are more, it's more capable than the others. But yeah, we should definitely figure out if we can remove it from
I
the
think
equation.
the two things that come off the top of my head are the ability to leverage our existing monitoring capabilities, because HA proxy, we have lots of monitoring metrics and such already in place and logs. I know already that we are losing logs from the pages service when people attempt to make a connection and then there's something wrong with SSL. Whether it be our fault, the client fault, what have you, like it doesn't matter to us as operators of the service, but to the people that are using the service, it will matter to. So I know Pages doesn't log every single connection that comes into it. So HA proxy for that point might be beneficial. And then ACLs, if there's some sort of abuse happening, HA proxy, we could quickly put rules in place to block people from destroying the service. So I already know that there's reasons to keep it in place, but I do think it's worth exploring, because from a technical standpoint, if it's just going to do the TLS termination, in the future, there would be caching in front of it. Right now, there's not. HA proxy is just kind of a dumb proxy at this point, not really doing much. So we'll have to look at any existing rule sets and such to figure out what we want to do in the future. But I do think that is a post-migration task. So I'll keep that in my back pocket. I'll create an issue to address that. So yeah, so staging will be primarily used for determining how to do the migration. At some point, I need to do some performance testing to figure out what kind of resources we'll need inside of these pods. Let's see. As far as migration blockers, I've identified at least 3 items that we're just missing inside of our Helm chart that enables certain options. This one, it looks like GitLab Logger is not properly starting potentially, and it's preventing us from capturing the first a few seconds in which GitLab Pages starts up, which is kind of crucial, because when GitLab Pages starts up, we get some clear information as to whether or not the service is healthy or not. So knowing that information when the pod starts is quite crucial. So in this proposal, I ended up taking all 3 of these issues because, distribution is busy with things. My proposal is just to remove GitLab Logger because Pages already outputs in a structured log format. We're completely missing the network policy, so we lack a bit of security that we need to maintain. So I'm trying to get that pushed into place. And then there's various options that are missing inside of Pages. Items I could think quickly are stuff related to let's see. I have 2 merge requests for this. So one is adding HA proxy v2 support. We currently leverage this in production. This currently exists in Pages, but does not exist inside of our Helm chart. So it's simply something we cannot yet activate. So I need this in place before I can push this into pre-prod. And then all this has been merged. Okay, so we've got at least 1 merged item for this. So that's kind of cool. So in this last one, I marked it as a blocker just so that I could discuss it very quickly. Pages has an integration with Sentry, but if you go to Sentry and if you go to the Pages specific application, there's no events. It's like the service is magical and doesn't have any errors at all. So in a different thread, I'm like, hey, does it actually work? Because it is configured correctly. And I know inside of our service, it's configured to talk to Sentry. So Jamie was nice enough to spin up an issue to figure out whether we simply aren't throwing any errors, which I know is kind of false because I've seen errors fly through our logs and I've seen errors fly through our metrics. It may just be that they're dropping a lot of errors potentially. So I only mark this as a migration blocker just to bring it to our attention. I don't think it's going to block us when it comes to moving to production because this is the current state today. So I thought that was an interesting fact that I came across. Does anyone have any questions about pages? All right, Sean.
Yes, I wanted to hijack this and ask some questions. So Yorick was asking the other day what happened to a background migration Sidekick job he had. And we know that long-running Sidekick jobs aren't a great fit for Kubernetes because, well, because your container can go away anytime, basically. Yeah, so we know that's a risk. But here I was just trying to figure out why, why the container went away. So we can see that we get the context deadline exceeded for the readiness, or I think it's the readiness one. And in some cases, Sidekick seems to be shut down gracefully. In other times, it just gets killed. Jav pointed out that, actually, let me just share my screen. Jav pointed out that we seem to be, so I think we have a 6 gig memory limit on this, which you can probably tell from this chart. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know if that's part of it. I assume we can't be hitting the CPU one because it's a single
CPU is just going to be a throttle at that point.
Well, yeah, also it's a single Ruby process, so it can't really use more than one CPU's worth of CPU. But yeah, like how do I go further here? Like, you know, I can see, so there's one here that was from yesterday that just got killed. This one from the other day was, I think this time range would be wrong, but I think this one got terminated more gracefully. So like it got to do its own shutdown steps. But like, how do I do anything useful here, basically? Sorry, let me just, oh, wait, these are the wrong ones. Yeah, feel free to start answering while I just try and find the right logs just to demonstrate that it died in a different way both times.
I have a question on this. So the deadline exceeded error is coming out from a Go process. So it's not Sidekick. It's the thing that is checking the readiness that has a timeout for receiving an answer, and this timeout is not met. So this means that Sidekick is not giving back the readiness probe timely.
Right, but like, is that a cause or is that an effect? And if it's a cause, like, how do we debug why it's happening?
Yeah,
so I mean, like, yeah.
What I'm thinking here is just random ideas that something got in between, maybe memory limits or something like that. So it received a signal, and maybe the handler for that signal, how it is implemented in Prometheus, is that it stopped accepting new connection. So while it was terminating the job, even though it doesn't have enough time for terminating it, it was reported as not ready, because obviously it terminated all new incoming connection. That's why you see this. This is just maybe a hint of something that happened before, because I don't expect this is blocking the web service for scraping the metrics.
Well, it could be. It's in the same process. Is it? Is the metrics web server in the same process as the Sidekick threads? I can't remember.
I would assume so.
It should be right. Yeah.
Yeah. So if it is, I mean, it's Ruby, right? So if it is in the same process and one of the Sidekick threads is doing something CPU heavy, then the readiness probe will fail because it can't, like the request can't be handled, like it won't obtain the global VM lock. But if that was the case, I'd expect this to happen a lot on the CPU bound pods. I don't actually know if it doesn't happen on the CPU bound pods, to be fair. It might do.
Yeah, I have to drop for another call, but my suggestion here is that if we can find logs from the Kubernetes to see if prior to this, it was sending some messages, so some termination and things like that, maybe that's an hint. And so this is just informing us that something.
As far as I'm
happening.
aware, these are all the Kubernetes logs for this pod.
Okay.
So
I've got,
I need to drop.
I guess
Sure.
two.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I've got two thoughts here. Is one, the fact that we don't see the liveness probe failing is a little bizarre. So either the liveness probe is not configured, or it might be configured a little differently. The liveness probe is what Kubernetes is going to utilize to say, hey, we need to restart this pod because something is wrong. The readiness probe will simply remove the pod from taking customer traffic, but Sidekick doesn't take customer traffic. So the fact that it has readiness probes is a little weird.
Okay.
I think it's like we'll need it to tell Kubernetes that, hey, this pod is ready. You could continue on with like a deployment, for example.
Okay. But it doesn't matter once the container
it's not
started.
accepting customer traffic, so it's not going to be inside of a service per se. So Sidekick itself is what pulls work. Nothing is distributing work to Sidekick in this particular case. So I think there's two avenues we need to explore. One, let's look at the liveness probe and see how it works, because I've forgotten at this point how it's configured. And let's determine if the liveness probe is causing these failures, and determining if that is leading to the pod being restarted. If I recall, Jarb had started a Slack thread and discovered that these pods were not showing a restart count being incremented.
Oh, I
And
hadn't seen that Slack thread.
I think I might be making this up because I dream a lot. The other avenue that might be worth exploring, because I did see the message that the process wrapper was killed. So that would lead to me to believe that it's not Kubernetes that's interfering here, but instead the node killer might be being invoked. So what we might want to look at is the node itself to validate it is not suffering from excessive memory usage.
Okay. So this chart that Henry is showing seems to be like pretty similar to the Thanos the dashboard from earlier, where it's like bumping up against.
If you look at it, you always see a memory bouncing up to the limit, right? And then crashing. Like it really looks like all the time we are just growing in memory until we reach the limit. And at that point, the pod will crash. So I think that is the reason why we see it constantly fail. So there's really something stopping it, because it's running on the memory limit.
So in the issue,
clear.
I think Jarv said, what did he say? He said
there's only one pod running normally for database.
Yeah, he said he expected the pod would be terminated after reaching the limit.
Yeah.
And he said so that we should be able to get whether it's hitting the limit from the logs. But I don't know if he means the node logs there or the pod logs.
They're going to be like the Kubernetes event logs.
Okay.
Let's have a
which
look.
we do have inside of Kibana.
Which chart do we use?
Database throttles is the one we're interested in. Oh, sorry, which node or which shard?
Yeah, I look for the nodes that could be running on like is the catch-all.
I wonder if it's default. Sean, you might still have the tab open that tells us which node pool that Shard is running on.
Yeah, one sec. In the deployment thingy, in the Kubernetes workloads repo.
Yeah.
What am I looking for? Node selector is default
name.
2.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's running on the default pool, which has over,
many
nearly
nodes.
58 gigabytes of RAM.
Yeah, but we are hitting the 6 gigabyte limit of the pod. So I think it's not really on the node, but on the pod limit that's getting terminated, right?
Yeah.
But that means we should be. We do have the headroom to bump up the
the
pod's memory if we want to try that. I mean, I don't even know what to set it to because it just You know, like if I set it to 7, is it just going to show the same behavior but with 7 gig? Like what's the?
We probably
need to
also
do
want to
some-
bump up its requests as well.
Yes.
Yeah, pod
Ah.
errors, killed with a 137. So
Oh,
you know,
nice.
the
Thank
node
you.
is definitely interfering with this pod's capability to complete its task.
Henry, would you mind posting that on the issue as well once we're done on this call? Thank you.
You mean the dashboard?
Sorry, the out of memory kill at the top there.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you scroll down, if you scroll down a little bit,
we'll make a screenshot of that one. I see.
yeah, that message right there is key.
Yeah.
And
So
that pod
yeah,
has 12
actually,
restarts. So we are
we should be
seeing
able to find these in
restarts.
Kibana, right? Did you say, Skavik?
Yes.
Okay,
There's
so
a GKE events index that should have this information.
Let me have a look. Because if I can correlate those to these, I mean, they should match the times, I guess. But if I can show that they match the same time, I've got GKE inf, audit, and systemd.
ENV.
Okay.
And then like the other thing, like if we're seeing this continuing to happen, but we're not seeing the pod show up with the restart by Kubernetes, that means the node that we're running on is suffering and the node itself is killing various processes. And if that's the case, we need to consider bumping up the requests for the RAM usage by this pod to help prevent or enable that pod to have the available memory to it.
Okay, so it sounds like, yeah, bump the memory requests and limits, see what happens to start with is an okay starting point. Is that right?
I would agree. We could also do a deep dive into node logs to see if the node is interfering or if Kubernetes is interfering. But yeah, I would start with that. That'll be the easiest and quickest way to go about it because going through logs is kind of painful.
Yeah, the memory bound shard, which I'm guessing is the one with the most memory limits and requests, is 3 and 8 gig for requests and limits. So I can set it to the same as, or I can request to set it to the same as that and see what happens.
Yeah, let's start with that and go from there.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much for
Just
that.
keep in mind that when we make that change, it's going to restart all the pods, I think, and then
right. But they get restarted often enough. It's fine. They can they can take another restart.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
And if you need additional help, let's try to prioritize this. That way we're not blocking Yorick's work here.
Yeah, well, Yorick actually just posted on the issue and said that he tried to run it in a console and the console got stuck. So he might have OOM'd the console. So
well, that's perfect.
Yeah, that might be the issue here. 8 gig seems quite. Is that low? I mean, like, I guess
It
I mean,
sounds
running
high to me. Like that sounds higher than what we're using for a memory bound shard.
No, it's the same as what we were using for memory bound. I was just trying to think in terms of VMs. Like how much memory did they have? I guess they were doing more. They were doing more things, right? Like it's not just the memory for the psychic process, so it's difficult to compare.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So it sounds like we've got enough information to move forward. Is there anything else we want to talk about that part? Cool. So our last item, our goals, I think our goal should be to knock out the remainder of this web migration, which we're currently doing, and I'm going to create a new issue to slow it down. So that's perfect. So cool. All right, that's all I have to discuss. Anyone have any further questions? Otherwise, we could, well, I'm going to go to lunch. Cool. Well, thank you all. Have a lovely day. See you later.